plan is that this kind of final moment at the end of the conference will be about half an hour. I want to start off by saying. So let's hope for that. And what we would like to do is basically that we will hand the microphone around this around the room, and anyone who feels like saying something is very welcome to say something. And if you don't feel like saying something, that's also totally okay. So that's what we will do.
If you can
yeah,
say
why not? Yes, exactly. That's really a good point. If you want to say something through asking somebody else a question, that's also absolutely fine. And there's more mics in the center. So if, for example, Michael, if you are asking Christian a question, then Christian can pick up a mic and answer it, and then the mic will continue around. Okay, so I will start, I guess, because I have the microphone. And yeah.
It would be nice to make full circle so that there are
come on, yes.
So how do we do it? We move out.
If everyone stands up, I can just pull the chair. I think that's the easiest way.
Well, if you vote for Monsanto, you get That's
I'm reminded there is a saying that I've completely forgotten exactly the words for what it is, but something about, as the host, you should always spill your wine on the tablecloth first, because then all the guests will feel warmly invited to just enjoy the dinner and not worry about making fools of themselves. So that's why I'm holding the mic, and I will start very short reflection on these 2 days. So it seems to me that the discourse of internationalization that emerged at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, gradually became diluted by the discourse of globalization. And I think that what we have been trying to do here, and what we want to continue to do over the next 2 years that this project is going to run, is to try to refocus our lenses again on the history of internationalism, to try to articulate the present, which is still an international moment, but as de-aligned somehow from the rhetoric of globalization. So that's the kind of historical movement that I perceive that we are trying to do. And I was also thinking about this idea of composite and composite identity, which has reappeared over the course of these 2 days. And it's very clear that composite identity is now a condition that we are all sharing. And this is coming out of various forms of fragmentation and dislocation that is acutely felt. And Alice and Andreas, of course, reminded me that this atomization is also a necessary step in the breaking up of monolithic discourse. But now it is very apparent that there's a great need for a new kind of ecology. And here I'm also reminded of Michelle and her presentation around feminism as translation and feminism as ecology. So a type of ecology that we need to formulate together, which we need to basically heal the tissue of life between all things. So between these fragments.
I've been thinking a lot about the title of this conference as the days have progressed. And I think maybe perhaps inspired, the thought occurred to me actually while Kojo was talking about a certain kind of temporality of his reading of the band. And I was thinking about what it would look like to think about this moment that we're in together from the future. Because I think during the conference we've been talking a lot about an anti-colonial moment, or even the invocation of the international as referencing a kind of Marxist international, which, you know, when we think about what it would look like 100 years from now to look back at this moment and think about why it would be important for us to think about something like Practice International at this moment, it just made me start to think about, well, what are the circumstances today that are so different from this word international? And I think the last presentation really directs our attention to some of that there's a way in which corporations act like states. They're more like states than states. There's a way in which, in fact, the kinds of treaties that are being inaugurated protect and make possible this movement of corporations. And I think that there's a way that the nation state actually becomes one of the few ways in which more vulnerable countries can protect themselves from the forces of globalization. So there's a really radical reorientation of the question of the nation that we're facing, and yet I think that the invocation of the international is a very important one. It also, I think, brings to mind an element of resistance that I think we're all interested in. And yet in this new configuration of power, you know, it really becomes a question of what are the strategies that we can find in that desire for resistance. And since this is taking place in the field of art, we all know very well that the field of art is so embedded in productions and reproductions of the nation or their favorite location for corporations. So I'm really interested in thinking about how there might be a site in which we produce within art, but also this question of what it is that we reproduce as we produce. And ultimately also a question about for whom we do any of this.
I'm going to be very brief as there's a lot of eyes looking and a lot of people to move on, but I too have been thinking a lot about what this title of the conference is and how and where we can kind of understand internationalism, so to speak. And I think Adam mentioned right before we closed, forecasting, you know, is this notion. And I think something we all do share is the weather in a way. And something we all know is that the weathermen are always wrong. So I think forecasting in a sense is maybe fraught in its own right. But something that meteorology does do is it is the study of conditions, right? I think it is the study of a certain present form of conditions. And I think this came up with ultra-red in the first day. And a present condition, which struck me, was Kojo's claim that all work now is made in relation to Fukushima. The work we all make.
No, the work we also make.
But I think this is a really interesting notion in its own right. I think like that we is kind of expanded in a way. No. But I mean, it's a certain kind of condition in its own right? And it's a condition which kind of defies a sense of temporality. It's a condition which changes our notion of crisis from being something which is reacted to something that is extended forward into the future, into beyond the future in a sense, if we think about temporality as existing in hundreds of thousands of years. So in that way, I think this has been very illuminatory to think about the present shared conditions. And it's something to think about in the various sites that the project moves to moving forward.
Well, I usually have a lot to say, but I'm more than anything humbled and kind of empty, and grateful for this absolutely generous, event and all the presentations. And some of the last sentences from the last presentations are kind of lingering on. And I have this kind of mantra of some kind of revolutionary forces of monstrosity to a certain extent, nature, being on our side somehow. And I just pass it on, nothing more.
I don't have that much to say at the moment, but a question that I'm thinking of, which I have to articulate, is what have we practiced over these 2 days? What kind of relations have we formed, and what kind of collective, or were we a collective for a day and a half? And also thinking of Alter Ed's questions, what kind of listening have we been involved in during these days? So I just pose questions at the moment and try to formulate, articulate it later, or maybe somebody else has an answer.
Okay, as I only made it this afternoon, I can only speak for the past hours and maybe intrude into your first assumption about a collective in that sense. At least I wasn't part of it yet. But the one question that I kept from Kojo's very nice meditation on the work of Godona as a projection of a post-electric age or time. I would like to know, Kojo, how do you think about your own work as a digital media-based work in relation to such a post-electric perspective?
That's a much more succinct version of actually something I also wanted to ask in a way.
Will you let him answer the question?
Yes, please.
Can I think about it?
Yeah. But there were really great presentations over the last 2 days, and what I very much appreciated how they were, many of them were situated in particularities of situations, and also the question of syncretism, which Park brought up especially, and this idea not only of internationalism, but of what one could call, for lack of a better word, local gods, the particularities of geographies that are not only important, but have a kind of resonance and gravitas and spirituality in and of themselves. And so the question that's kind of, I guess, piggybacking to your question is also related to Godona's work, and then the digital response is related to a quote from Jonathan Richman that I've carried with me since I was a teenager, which is that he said, we have to learn how to make music when our amplifiers cars are broken and it's raining outside. And this maybe would have to do with the kind of if there is an ethical or moral or simply an imperative. I don't want to use either ethical or moral necessarily, but an imperative about how we approach technology or how we deploy technology in this present moment, and which also has a lot to do with what Leela addressed in her presentation about ascetic practices and political and ethical necessity of ascetic practices in terms of not only like reducing carbon footprints, but perhaps understanding how we can do not more with less, but how we can do with less.
Is it okay also to like later? Yeah. But can I have a chance?
Nobody knows.
You don't have to speak.
No, but I like to speak. Oh,
I just can't. Oh, okay. I'm gonna try to articulate because I've been involved in seminar from spatial justice to rural reconstruction to now the internationalism. So there's a lot of information in my head, very unorganized. But I'm just gonna share what struck me most immediately is I'm from Taiwan, and maybe Taiwan can be a site of reference of many others' experience. And in Taiwan now we are really at a very strange, critical juncture of history where there's barely any sense of hope, and we call our land island of ghosts. Because it feels as though that we are stuck in the present forever. And this present is very sad and depressing. And the realization to this sad reality is by rational thinking. So therefore, rational thinking is very depressing. So, so actually I was personally resonated a lot to Park's presentation about superstition. Because superstition now in Taiwan seems to be something that we very profoundly lean on to. Because through this mysterious unknown, we could probably find some mysterious answer or solution. But I do really appreciate that Dina, this global moral perfectionism. I think somehow it kind of gave me a sense of like a point of departure to think how to move forward. And so thank you very much for your generosity.
And maybe sort of picking up on that last point as well, I suppose I was thinking about, Leela's saying sort of the idea of self-ruin and living some sort of scandalous life or a minor life in that way, and it made me think a lot about embarrassment and kind of being in those situations, which is quite, when everyone's looking at you, quite embarrassing, and kind of how that's a really important thing to embrace or embody as a way of sort of thinking about the moments when you can actively be embarrassed as a way of sort of situating yourself outside of the normalized expectations of how you should practice or present yourself. So yeah, that's one thing I was thinking about.
Well, thank you everybody for these 2 days, very intense, very good. I
would just address some thoughts. I've noticed in the presentation that many of the artists are involved in some activist, or very active engagement with a certain context and people and articulating a geography. So I wonder what's really, I mean, if this engagement and this form of activism is a kind of prerequisite for being international, or for, I don't know, or if, so just a wondering or looking for ways of being together in, maybe in different ways to find this, point of junction of different realities. And I have always the same question. I don't know. It's what differentiates art from activism? So this is a very big question, but that's very difficult to answer from my point of view. And also another thing, I've been interested in I was thinking of it, listening to the presentation of Koja from the Arthelite, of this idea, the emphasis on the idea of repetition, and so how much important it is to really retell history or stories, and to revisit or re-see a place, or to re-narrate an experience, or to rework also, or restate a work of art. So how can be important to repeat and to redo things in order to get maybe a sense of it. Yeah.
I think, firstly, I'd like to say that what I found very good about this conference was that that the art was very present. Often in conferences, it's the kind of elephant in the room that's never discussed and is never there and is never present or shown in any way. And what I found particularly good about this conference was that the art was always there and always present and always discussed. And the other thing I wanted to point out briefly was the very interesting point that Lila made about an anti-romantic turn in the 19th century, wasn't it? Well, you can speak more, but yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can deal with this. Okay. You know, I'm also working for this Biennale happening next year in Seoul. It's called Media City Seoul, as an artistic director. So I now become a curator, have this big task to invite, international artists. So the issues we are dealing with here is really relevant to what I'm doing now. And last month we invite like Alain Badiou and Slavoj Zizek. And also we invite Wang Hui, a Chinese political philosopher who is dealing with this, the idea of empire and colony in East Asia. So then the Alain Badiou was really, he really emphasized on this universality in politics and also in art practices. Because, it's apparently that the global capitalism is so strong now, and we have to think about this, and we have to react to this urgency in practice. But at the same time, I felt a little bit like, he kind of, and Slavoj Zizek also reduced everything to global capitalism. You know what I mean? It's like going back to the global capitalism, and everything is really a problem out of this global capitalism. And then, you know, I wanted to say what is happening in Korea, and I mean, I showed this, my little pieces, so bad, but, and then you know what I'm interested in? I'm interested in tradition. Where is the tradition? I mean, in Asia we have to have tradition, but there's no tradition. And these kind of occasions that is really linked to the to very specific local entity, in the cultural sense, in the political sense, and economy too. So, I mean, they were very happy. I mean, they really get along together. It's Wang Hui and Slavoj Zizek and everyone. But still, there are two different tendencies that some of them will really, you know, have interest in what is happening in local entity, and the other one is thinking a lot about internationalism, right? So these are, I'm actually struggling within this. I mean, thinking about the Biennale, whether I should put Asia in the title. If I put Asia, like an Asian Gothic, then people will say, what is Asia? Where is the Asia? I mean, Asia is nowhere. I mean, everywhere. Asia is everywhere, but Asia is nowhere. I mean, these kind of questions would come out. And so, yeah, I mean, this conference is really nice. Thinking about this. Okay, and then, okay, came too fast to me, so. And then, my question is, and then we still have this kind of difficulty with dealing with this internationalism in local art scene, because we have quite few international artists, I mean, who are famous in European countries and probably North America, United States. Then we have local artists who couldn't, you know, who speak in English very well, and always thinking about Korea. And then it's like I mean, it doesn't really change anything. I mean, from like a colonial period, the artists who are well known internationally, who always talk about their tradition. And then there are like artists famous in Korea who always talk about Western avant-garde, and it's still the same in Korea. So I have to find out the good way to resolve this problem. I think that it needs time, and I think a lot of money, and also impatience to fulfill what somebody called transcultural transcultural practice. Because it's like a culture is like, for me, it's like a smell, unfamiliar smell many times. So it needs time to learn more, and in the conference I can pick up some of the words, and I can I have this good presentation, and then I was really interested in some of the parts the presenters presented today also. But then I miss a lot. I can remain in this professional level. And I mean, if you think about this richness of all the references you have. So what I want to say is really kind of, it takes time to be really internationalist. For now, I think about this. Yeah. I will come later, more later.
Yeah, at first we are very sorry that we only get some impression of this meeting this afternoon, but this impression was really empowering somehow, also because of the notion of internationalism, because I know that this term was absolutely criticized, and maybe this is some kind of other side of globalism. in this kind of globalism, internationalism was criticized because of this kind of identity policies, that your own political interest could only worked out if you are belonging to that group. For example, unemployment can only speak for unemployed, and so on. And I guess this was some kind of end of some kind of political activity at all, if I can only speak for my group of interest. And what I saw this afternoon here, there was this many communities, this many historical cases of community of this trans-international interests. And I guess that is really very worthy to save and to remember, that we have this kind of internationalism as some kind of historical continuity, that we can go on with that, yeah. And even in this kind of art field, I guess, there are a lot of holes where we can organize that kind of internationalism.
Well, I have more of an open question after these 2 days. I wonder if this term, this notion of internationalism belongs to Western Europe somehow. I mean, all this debate, or does it go beyond Western Europe in terms of initiation? Or if this is not yet again a term like post-colonialism, which was still pushed by Western Europe. So I'm just wondering how you, yeah, I mean, it's an open question, as I said. I mean, it's also, I see a project that is being initiated by 3 organizations based in Western Europe. So I see it as a challenge also for you. How will you be able to look critically upon it without reproducing the same position, historical position?
It was so good, I can.
It's actually been a real privilege for me to be in this gathering. I've learnt a lot, and I'm very humbled by the varieties of knowledges and practices that I've witnessed over the last 2 days. I just want to say 2 further things linked by an apparent non sequitur. The first is that, in fact, what I think this conference has delivered is a taxonomy for internationalism. We have many variants. We have superstition, we have non-reproductive resemblance, Kojo's film. We have non-generative reproduction in the last presentation, duration, all a taxonomy like Borges's Chinese fable. That's actually a very productive place to begin by thinking of all the incarnations or avatars of internationalism and globalization. And the second thing I want to say, and here's the non sequitur, the French, Jewish, Algerian mystic from the early 20th century, Mira Alfassa, who was also a guru of modern India, once said that the problem in our practice is that we don't take our share of the negative, that we're always trying to be virtuous. And so long as we do that, we won't get very far. And it strikes me that the one thing that artists can do that the rest of us can't is take their share of the negative and play many parts. And so I want to return with Kojo to, I think, a celebration of the assuming of monstrosity that was demonstrated in the last performance. And I think that all of us who think about internationalism, and especially those of you who are artists, it's very impressive to, of course, be passionate but not to be partisan and to take your share of the negative, because you can do it, the rest of us can't. We have to take sides for the sake of argument, to clarify an argument, you know, in merely academic thought. It's very hard, it's very difficult to not defend a position. But there is something that art is able to do, to occupy and inhabit that which is negative, so that as we think about internationalism, the aesthetics of internationalism, it might be useful to also occupy what is negative about internationalism, so that we know it better, because both will be with us, good and bad internationalisms, whether we like it or not.
I was about to say something similar, but not as intelligently put. But the title is twofold, right? So it's Practice International, and I think, it's the strong part. I agree. Is when practice has operated. Maybe I would put it more like a prism on internationalism. So it kind of and I agree with you. I think it's because the focus is on practice, not only on the artwork as you're saying, but actually on the practice itself. And I think that allows a certain ambivalence, which is really, if there's anything that's kind of predominant in our sort of right now, it's the difficulty to find a space where things can mean many things at the same time. And I think art is one of those spaces. I still do, and I think that focusing on practice is a very key way of discussing something like that without sort of falling into a trope or providing an argument. Then I think in the academic sense you can change your position tomorrow, and that's okay. But that's another question.
I'd like to follow from this thing of the practice of internationalism, but before that, I'd like to thank Grant Watson, because he introduced me and Adam to Lisa and this thing. I'd never heard of you people, by the way. I'm 75 years old. Anyway, I cannot speak for other artists, not even for my lovers, my best friends. I can only speak for myself, because we're all in that sense really unique. Our experiences can never be doubled, even if you are both cubists like Picasso and Braque, or you're something else, you're both surrealists like Max Ernst and René Magritte or whatever, you see. So I can just say that I'm so happy to go to a place where I know very few people. I met very interesting, very friendly, very lovely people. And that's the first thing. The love is for me the most important. Not necessarily sexual love, but love of friendship. Now, talk about internationalism. As you know, throughout this conference, I've always played devil's advocate. That is to say, I question people's maybe assumptions, presumptions, or when they verge into something that I'm very unsure what it means or what it signifies. But I'll go back to just two things. Contradiction. I said to Lisa, I love a quotation, which I've always used, about my own art from Walt Whitman. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. And that's what actually Gandhi just said, that should not only be internationalists, we should also be nationalists in the best possible way. Then the last quotation, before I hand this on, is quite a beautiful one from Frantz Fanon. He said many years ago, everywhere I travel, I create myself.
When I came here, I felt a bit challenged by the text presenting the seminar. Somehow, maybe I misunderstood it, but it was something about the post-colonial strategies being taken over by other strategies, or kind of having been played out somehow. Yes, and I thought that Michelle and others here really presented what I feel, that the post-colonial strategies are just being enforced, or, I mean, feminist ecology, for instance, is a very good post-colonial strategy, and that Pessoa as well, taking so many identities. I mean, that was just a way to say that I think we will always live with post-colonial strategies. But I just, to final saying, it's a big difference to just counter the apocalypse and the catastrophe, but really to embody that is kind of brave. And I think that's what artists can do.
Okay, I will be very briefly. It's 8:20 now, and lunch is very long ago, and I've got at least 2 glasses of wine. So, but I would like to pick up something from your introductory remarks to this round table, round carpet discussion, which is the composite identity, the idea or the concept of the composite identities. And something you said, these identities, these composite identities that we all share now in one or another way. And this is something which somehow troubles me all the time, how we can appropriate certain concepts that were formulated, that were developed in very specific contexts, in colonial context situations, very much related to colonialism, migration, slavery, and so on, and how we can universalize or generalize these concepts and appropriate them also for our white European identity concepts, which is somehow problematic. But on the other hand, one has to say that some of the people, some of the writers, for instance, Edouard Glissant, who coined this term of the culture composite, in opposition to what he called the atavistic cultures. He later on, he himself said that now the whole world is creolizing. So this is I think a kind of challenging tension between the specificity of a term developed in a certain situation and its possibility or impossibility to globalize it for us all and for every kind of situation.
I must say I'm a bit confused, maybe even more than before this assembly, so I want to try to just get some thoughts together, which is really difficult. And my first confusion, or the biggest, is about the words we used: internationalism, practices. And it's not so much that words per se interest me, but more kind of, I think we are facing an epistemological problem and still have to clear what our contribution as artists, activists, or whatsoever can be. So we talked about us moving, us being forced to move, us connecting issues or people and coming together, and us practicing arts. So I noticed that there is this big interest in connections and taking this maybe as international or internationalism, which is not really clear since now, I would say. But maybe, and this is my question, or even more than a question, this is not enough to understand what globalization is, or a new mode of accumulation of capitalism, or crisis, or maybe also remainings and new forms of colonialism. And I think we should ask whether arts can go beyond connections and invest on conditions to understand and point to our own and other people's agency. And this always includes answers to the question who our people are. I think that's it.
I have to try if the microphone is working. I want to, since there's so many people very bright about post-colonial theories here, I want to ask a question also on the language. Since when I studied a lot of post-colonial theory earlier, it was very important not to mention, if your subject was post-colonial theory or post-colonial studies, to mention it as post-colonialism, like as a subject or a field. But today I very often hear people mentioning post-colonialism when they talk about post-colonial theory or studies. And my question is and even smart, intelligent people, and it's like, is it the way that post-colonial theory has failed in a way and got into becoming a ism that it never should become? Because it should be more queer and more, not fixed. Maybe you want to answer?
What do you think? No.
It seems like I've inherited some kind of question. So then maybe, since you mentioned language, and since any of the language I speak, I wasn't born speaking them, so it's perhaps a question of adoption, question of friendship, or growing towards, which is exactly what maybe we can think through in terms of reusing or renaming or readopting what certain words used to mean. That means, traversing with them in the past, but also speculating on, possibilities of what they might mean in the future. So in relation to assembly, a few works came through that obviously relate to the to assembling, to resembling, to ensembling, to obviously things that can take forms as we're sitting now. So then I think that's precisely what a friendship is. It could be a violent action, since it revolves around repulsion, attraction. These are movements that equally resonate through the universe, if you want, because these are orbital. These are bodily as well as atomic, as well as anything else you could probably imagine. That there's kinds of gravities, weighty, light, floating, falling, ascending, moving, if you want, but also fixed. So then I would maybe just go through quickly, 1 minute. Maybe why should it be 1 minute? I'll go through as long as it takes to maybe assemble some of the thoughts that have been gathered in this last page of the notebook. And then obviously it relates to starting with the question asked by Grant and Bina and Lisa, and then crystallized to some extent by Lila, which is this micropolitics, and something that Kojo picked out, which was the gesture, I suppose. So in the first, going from the last work we saw to the first one, there was this kind of appearance or apparition of the monster, if you want, this sort of appropriative action of a form, which is, say, like a slapstick, which is just only a passing of a figure, but also like visualizing complexities through particular language, which is again inherited from like industrial times,
where again all kinds of impossibilities were wanting to be, or were compelling to be visualized in one way or another. And then there was this percussion projection, which for me is precisely what forecasting is, or is what divination is. So it sort of inhabits that projecting through, again, another gesture, a bodily gesture that otherwise produces sound, but this time it's produces an image. And then the third one, the one to that was Park's presentation, which somewhat attempted to inhabit the sublime, which is some kind of reclaim or claim, which is fascinating for, as Jason mentioned, the possible implications of mysticism. And then this previous one of Christian, which is this sort of skepticism towards historical claims. So 89, not as 89 as it should look, as Kodjo mentioned. And then the Wendelin's work, which was this focusing through the body. So again, it's a very orbital, like distance and proximity, getting close in order to see. And then Lisa and Johannes, which was this radicality of like rearing, educating through visiting and hosting. And then also the ones before, which is Medalas, which was this like fragments of a life, which I thought that's how he introduced his presentation. I thought it was in a way great, and then sort of going through a bag full of shadow, which is again something somewhat inaccessible. And then Michelle's translation, and then Leela Gandhi's evolvement around maybe correspondence, if you want. So this sort of responding to, or against, or with, which is a way of making sense of what is around us, or shaping worlds. And then the ultra-red, which maybe I could think of it as some kind of approximation, since listening is always cluttered with noise, regardless of any sort of clarity. There's blood going through the body, so there's always be some kind of tempering with hearing. So there's an environment of the sound. So there's a certain filtering that is inevitable. So there's a certain, I suppose, membraneity that is inevitable to come to an assembly. So that process of either filtering or attracting is clearly a psychobiological movement, which seems to be, I mean, at the heart of Leela propositions of, looking at sort of gesticulative actions towards those who are either receiving affliction, and in her later work now, those who are actually inflicting.
I was thinking about this beautiful thing that Alice said at the end, or at the end of their presentation and almost at the end of our day, is how can I experience political reality? How can I experience political reality? And it's something that I think I really take away from all of the presentations, is something about form. So practice, yes, but as a maker, I also think, like, what form does that then take, and what forms can we give to it? And these forms also we have, I think, experienced quite nice, how can I say, form being articulated as narrative. Narratives have form, so therefore they can be, they can produce one thing or another. And also, gosh, I already lost my train of thought. But then sorry, my mind actually jumped to the idea of the practice of self, of the practice of this self, that I also take away of Leela's talk, of how so first there comes, how can I experience political reality, and how can I then practice, how can I then practice my, my own ongoing mutilating self in that, and then what form do I give it to go out again? I think that's sort of things I started to pick up and think about.
Many small moments take on an epic dimension when I replay them, or rather when they replay me. And many of the epic statements are already starting to recede. So I'll just list this list of small moments that are taking on epic dimensions. There was which will stay with me. There's a point when David was whispering the voices of Bacchus and Eros in Cézanne's The Card Players, and he said, "Pick up the cards." That's the first moment. That will stay with me forever. There was a moment in Chan Kyung's video where the old man who is humming, there's a cut and he stands up, and then there's a cut and he sits down again. This moment will stay with me forever. There's a moment when Leela evokes Pessoa's invocation of Gandhi as the unarmed hero. This moment will stay with me. The moment when Christian talked about the colour blue, this will stay with me. The moment in Michelle's film when the harmonium and the viola play together, this will stay with me. There was a moment in Ultra Red where Elliot and Chris and Sabrina all misheard chorus. Somebody said chorus, then somebody else said chorus. Then lots of people started saying chorus about 4 times. It was a beautiful moment. This will stay with me. And then there was a moment in Andres and Alicia when I realized this. There was this umbilical cord tying the animal spirits of the corporations to their bags. And I realized the bag is something like they describe the bag as a stomach and a totemic figure. And this will stay with me, and maybe the poetry of Marx. He was a poet, and the most serious one, and this will stay with me as well.
Thanks. I just made a list of things under the word practice and under the word international as a way to order them. Maybe not to completely clarify those terms, but at least to sort of place some concepts by them. Like Wendelin, I was very interested and inspired by Leela Gandhi's introduction of the work of the self, and how she indicated the possibility of the way that this could link up to at least the collective. The question of techniques that came up in that talk, which I related to questions of protocols that were there in Ultra Red's workshop, but also in Radical Pedagogy's presentation, and the round that they introduced, which we're now kind of also performing in a way. Michelle's introduction of feminism as a process of translation, and her quote from Spivak about being attentive to the poetic, which unfortunately wasn't completely unpacked during the process of this assembly, but would be very interesting to follow up. But also to techniques and strategies of information gathering from Alice and Andreas. And then under international, the evocation of communism by Kojo this afternoon, and returning to Leela Gandhi's text, where there's this discussion of the way that utopian socialism was sort of written off by scientific socialism, which made me think about different kinds of political work, and the way that the former allowed this space for heterogeneous kinds of political practices. And then questions of scale that came up for me in relation to Tagore, which somebody brought up today, and Tagore's interest and investment in the minor. And Michelle saying that she had this question in terms of that to do with the urgency of certain political moments and when confrontation is sort of demanded. And maybe also the repetition of ecology and feminism as two sort of global international movements that can provide coordinates and linkage.
To keep it very simple, I have a feeling that it's been an incredible privilege to have a portal into all your thinking and your strategies and ways of communicating your thoughts here, because as you said, the art is very present in this room. I'd just like to end on one note. I think we've been dealing with the historical and the post, and I think by dealing with this within works and within these talks here, I think we're post-post and now possibly led to the pre and pre-internationalism, and see what will be born as opposed to what has gone before us. It's important to keep history in mind, but I think it's very important now to position ourselves in a moment of pre. I thank you all, because it's been really enlightening, everything that everybody's offered here today and yesterday.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. I hope to continue Obina, did you want to come? Okay, you get the final word then. You asked for it.
To be honest, because I didn't want to do this, I was thinking of running into that seat, but you guys were so fast, so I missed that moment. And then I was thinking of another moment to jump into there, and then around that moment I was thinking of silence, especially as you two, Chris and Elliot, didn't say anything. So here, who's listening and then who's saying, and I don't know, there was, this position of listening and position of speaking. And also me, myself, constantly oscillating between these two positions. Somehow, I mean, at the same time, we all sit around and then have a chance to speak and listen. It's something moving to me. And then I was thinking of, I'm saying a lot of trash now because I wanted to say something really meaningful for all of us. No, just something very beautiful happened over these 2 days. Is that more as a question? I would put it like, what has undone us? I'm so curious, also in relation to your question of whether we became collective or not. And I think there are many. So these many is something that I like to write about, in fact, what has undone us. And then something helpful, hopefully, is that just as one of the kind of way of understanding or finding answer for this question is that recognizing that we are living in time of dystopia. So late 19th century, I came across again and again, seems to be quite amazing era, which hard to imagine, but it seems there was time of utopia. And then there are another time of utopia, whether it was dictatorship or not, that was 60 and 70, early 70. I don't, it feels like those two at least to bring now was a moment of like universal moment, like world time. I don't know whether we can call it like that. And we are in another world time. I felt that we see the dystopia. We all see the dystopia and in this in the middle of dystopia, there is a yearning, or like, so back to Chang Kyung's presentation, that this kind of, there are a few moments that I felt like crying because of this kind of little, leak of a moment of hope, or like we have kind of, we share a certain yearning for better life in this middle of dystopia. So I think that's something very sad, at the same time very beautiful and hopeful.